Hello, I'm Tim Robinson, Editor-in-Chief of Aerospace magazine, and with me is Deputy Editor Steve Bridgewater.
Hi guys.
And Features Editor Jack Richardson.
Hi.
Welcome to Aerospace NOTAM, another edition of our video podcast and video cast, looking at global aviation, aerospace and space news, and what we have upcoming in the next edition of Aerospace. February 2025 already. In the magazine, we cover everything from GA to spaceflight, from airliners to airports, from airlaw to eVTOLs. So firstly, before we get down to what's been happening in the news, where have you been this past month? Jack?
Well, early in January, Tim and I attended the launch in London of the Wind Racers Mark II, Wind Racers is a very innovative UK company which produces the ultra low cost drone, which they market as a Jeep of the skies, which can fly for roles including humanitarian aid, transport, logistics, surveillance, and monitoring fires. So, very interesting machine.
So they launched a new version, didn't they?
They did, yes, a new version. So only obvious difference is a inverted V tail on the tail, but it's enhanced range and payload and usability. So it was a really interesting event. Massive, quite a glitzy one.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a high-profile rollout. We were there thinking it would just be a couple of us and a few journalists, and 150 people in a top London hotel on the Strand for a new aeroplane.
When was the last time that happened in the UK?
Well, exactly, yes, a new British aircraft, a new rollout. So that was good. So meanwhile, we also had Aero Society Lates. So that's our social events. So last week we had a showing of Apollo 13, classic space film. Who doesn't love Apollo 13? Tom Hanks. And we had Pat Norris in there, who was our special guest, who worked on Apollo in the 60s. Wow. He was there. He wasn't in mission control, but he was working on the software that made navigation to the moon and back possible. And really interesting. We had a Q&A session with him afterwards. And great to see so many people in there, and especially young people as well. Yeah. There was a couple of people there from Surrey Satellites who came to talk to him afterwards and said, look, this is really amazing. We're working on, I think they said we're working on Pathfinder stuff for the moon. So they were really, really excited by it. Great night out, and there were Aero Society Lates.
It was a brilliant evening, because seeing the film itself, it's really has stood the test of time, even though it came out 30 years ago this year.
Yeah, on the aerospace thing as well, we also had the ESSI conference the other week, so that's Earth and Space Sustainability Initiative. That was a major conference there, looking at ways in which we can not pollute Earth orbit, low Earth orbit, in the same way we polluted the seas. So basically get ahead of the game there and try and think about things like space debris. But there's also things like atmospheric pollution from returning rockets. And one of the interesting things there is that they said that there's CFC coming in there. Part of obviously particulates in the upper atmosphere. There's things like aluminium, things like mercury, but also it can actually undo all the progress that's been made in the ozone layer. So remember,
CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons.
Yeah. So remember in the 80s, everyone stopped the CFCs, and we actually repaired the ozone layer. That was a major thing, and now it's a danger, possibly danger, of undoing this, because we've got having more and more satellite launches, more and more satellite re-entries. It's one of the things that it may seem, you think, well, there's not that many satellites going to space at the moment, but it is growing, and the more and more we get, the bigger this problem is going to become, and it's trying to get ahead of that, so as we don't make it uninhabitable or just too dangerous or pollution.
And there's a big push for not leaving satellites and space debris up there, but are we actually creating a bigger problem by bringing them back down again? So lots of debates, isn't there?
Anyway, so that was what's happened. Now we're on to the news roundup, and that's been a bit of a grim month, hasn't it, really, for aerospace. So the biggest news, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, is the crash in Washington. CRJ airliner and a Black Hawk, US Army Black Hawk helicopter coming on approach. 76 people killed in a horrible mid-air. Now, obviously on this channel, we don't speculate, but it is busy airspace. It is night. And everything's there in close proximity, and from early reports that the crew were also at NVG. So it is a kind of a complex, very, very, I wouldn't say high risk, but it is
it's a condensed
airspace around that. And obviously it's the capital. It's where people are flying in, and it's near the Pentagon. So it's going to be busy. So we're just waiting to see what comes out of that there. And, like I say, we're not here to sort of speculate. Some of the stuff that's been in the news just has been completely, really sort of outrageous.
Yes.
In terms of, I think we can say that we want there. People are obviously keen to know what's happened. Pilots, especially, are keen to know, get the causes out there, learn from them as soon as possible. But we want to wait for the NTSB to do their work, for the FAA to do their work, and just learn the lessons from that in the prescribed manner, rather than people then sort of jump to conclusions.
Indeed.
What else have we got in the news then? Steve, over to you.
I've got a general aviation story. That's a surprise, isn't it? A new electric aircraft, which has actually been certified. So this is the first 4-seat electric aircraft to get type certification. It's in China. It's the Lyon Aerospace Academy. I think I'm pronouncing that terribly. But it's being marketed by a Hong Kong company called Valar Aerospace. Now, Valar I met at Singapore Air Show last year, and again at Friedrichshafen. So that's the 4-seat electric aircraft. The interesting thing with this is they're actually also developing a hydrogen-powered 4-seater. That aircraft was in Germany last year. Had a good look around that. But they've got a 2-seater. Now, the 2-seater has already been type certificated, available on wheels and floats. But both the 4-seat and the 2-seat electric aircraft, what makes them different is they've got swappable batteries.
Yeah.
And that is the crucial thing here. So any other electric aircraft at the moment, you get to the end of the charge, you've got to plug it in and recharge it. These have got batteries that you take out, you put a freshly charged battery in, you put that one onto charge and you fly on. To get that into an EASA stroke CAA stroke FAA system is going to need a change of regulation, because at the moment swapping a battery it needs to be signed off by an engineer. So this is a great system. I think there's a lot of potential in this, but how it works into a non-Chinese type certificate remains to be seen.
Because essentially the argument would be you're putting a new part into an aircraft.
Effectively it's a modification. So it's the same as changing the brakes or you're changing the propeller. All you're doing is changing the battery, and they are on a quick release jack plug. I was demonstrated it at Friedrichshafen last year. They say it's a 10-minute job. In reality, it's a 3-minute job. It really is just open hatch, take the battery out, unplug it, put a new one in, and you're away to go.
Right.
So you see that. The other interesting thing with the 2-seater is it comes in, I think, at around, the figure's exact price, about 650 kilos. Now, current European regulations are 600 kilos. And Valar is saying, well, we can get the weight down on this aircraft in time, but we need it into service first. So you've got a mandatory 600 arbitrary figure is their mileage here, and actually changing that to allow these new aircraft to come in at 650, give or take, and then bring it down in time.
Interesting. Okay. Talking about electric aircraft, Jack, you've got some news there, haven't you?
Yeah, there have been developments on the eVTOL front. So over the Christmas period, there was mixed news with German firm Volocopter filing for insolvency. But at the same time, Lilium, who also German with their distinctive ducted electric fan mechanism, have signed a rescue deal to continue work. So it's a mixed story on the eVTOL front. People have talked before about how eVTOLs are now coming under more scrutiny, both in terms of finance and the viability of their engineering. So it seems there are going to be could be a lot of progress on this going forwards, both for aircraft entering service and those not making it. And here in the UK, Vertical Aerospace have just completed their second phase of trials.
Okay, so it's the piloted hovering. They've just completed, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the third phase is going to be the big one. Really is kind of like the powered transition from hover to forward flight and back again. So well, good luck with that.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about flight test. So big news as well. Last week, wasn't it?
It was.
Last week we had Boom Supersonic, which flew their XB1 technology demonstrator, and it went supersonic over Mojave, over California. They got special permission to do that, and they achieved Mach 1.11 on their 12th flight. So that's a big milestone for a private startup company developing this technology demonstrator. It's really a proof of concept for the Overture airliner that they're working on, and going supersonic. Wow! They've got one more flight to do, and it's going to be the 13th flight, and then it's off to a museum, which is a bit of a shame. But it's really dare to say that this small private team, I think there's only about 150 or 250. It's a very, very small team. Can do something like this. Can build a supersonic aircraft. Can flight test it. So really exciting stuff there about the kind of future of supersonic flight and commercial supersonic flight we're talking about here.
Well, we watched the supersonic flight here in the office through the live feed, didn't we? And it got a real buzz to it.
And live streamed by Starlink as well.
Live streamed, my Bannister there as hosting it. I mean, a little bit of Raymond Baxter there. He's channeling his inner Raymond Baxter, definitely. But it's just one of those exciting moments that we seem to have quite a lot of recently. We've had a sort of exciting time in aerospace.
And kudos as well to Blake and the Boom team there for the transparency of the flight test. Because posting obviously it's a social media age. It's 24/7 news and stuff like that. But posting your flight test. Kind of cards, your data cards, what you're aiming to do. There was a bit of an admission. They had, I think it was something with the flutter or something in one of the earlier tests. They got through that. So it was really sort of a nice insight, into this is how you do a flight test, and then the live telemetry
and live radio as well, listening into the cockpit, right from pre-flight right the way through to shutdown.
So if you're interested in aviation, if you're an aeronautical professional, if you're an av geek, that was just pure catnip.
Yeah, definitely brilliant stuff.
What have we got?
What else have I got? I've got it's not a general aviation story. It's a business aviation story. So Piaggio, the Piaggio Avanti. Piaggio went into liquidation in 2018, financial difficulties. Italian governments have been looking for a buyer for the company for quite a long time now, and they've extended the deadline until May 2025. Last month, the Turkish company Bayar, the drone company, have acquired the assets to Piaggio. So we know they've already modified the Piaggio Avanti into the UAV. There's yet to be an announcement as to what the future is going to be for the company, whether these will continue as business aircraft, or how they intend to develop that business line. But it's great to see the Avanti sail. It's one of the most distinctive aeroplanes around. One I remember as a kid flying over, and you'd hear it coming.
Yes.
Very, very distinctive sound.
Yes.
Great to see Piaggio saved, and hopefully we'll see the Avanti in one shape or another moving forwards.
Yeah, but still with its distinctive pusher props.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What about you, Jack? What else have you got?
Well, this is a military aviation story. It's quite hard to believe that it's now 10 years since Embraer's C390 transport aircraft made its first flight. And in that time, it's now been operated and ordered by nine customers, with an undisclosed customer ordering 2 examples just around Christmas.
Right, okay, so that's the Brazil, Austria,
Netherlands,
Portugal,
South Korea, Portugal, Hungary, Chechnya,
Czech Republic,
Sweden and Slovakia.
Okay.
Wow.
So it's a very broad user base with lots of differing requirements. It's really very interesting to see a new transport aircraft come on scene after the 7 decades of domination by the C-130 family.
Yeah, I mean, also it's NATO countries that are buying this as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, they've obviously got, if you get the stamp of approval from NATO countries, that's pretty impressive. And also South Korea, because they were going up against a similar size of transport there from Korean aerospace industries as well, which were pitching that. And South Koreans went, no, we're going to buy it from Brazil. So yeah. So watch this space for more C-130 kind of operators who are looking around for a new aircraft and new tactical transport and going, what else is there in the market?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. What else? Oh, so I've got back to me, and I've got. So we're talking about space debris earlier, and it's now starting to affect flights. So there's already been some talk there about from airlines about launch cadence in Florida when they're having to divert around launch zones and things like that. Now it turns out that Qantas, I think South African Airways. They've had to divert flights as well, or delay flights because of re-entering corridors, mainly sort of SpaceX there, so flight tests and just keep clear. Obviously, if you've seen the last test of Starship, where it got spread out over quite a bit of space.
Very nice firework as well.
Yeah, you knew why.
Lots of diversions needed.
But I mean, that's something that could be a kind of a growing problem as we see more satellites. We enter bigger satellites, bigger pieces of junk. I mean, space station coming down at some point is going to be mean a lot of airspace cleared. So I think that's one to watch for the future as to the balance between airspace. Usually when you talk about airspace users, your normal thing is right. Okay, well it's the airlines versus GA. And then it's the GA versus the drone users, and we don't. And until now, we haven't had rocket, space users versus the airlines.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
We all share the same airspace.
Yes. What else have you got?
I've got an airline-related story to airlines there. So Delta marked their 100th anniversary this year, their centenary later this year. Big announcement this year, they're working on a lot of sustainability initiatives, a lot of SAF development, things like that. But they're also signed up now to the Airbus Fellow Fly scheme. Now, this is something I remember this being announced probably about 15 years ago, in a press conference at the top of the Gherkin. I don't know whether you were there, Tim. So this was aeroplanes flying like flocks of geese. So, you see geese flying, and I'm doing the hand thing again if you're not on YouTube, flying in a V and surfing the wave of the bird in front. Well, Airbus are proposing this for airliners as well. So Delta have signed up to do trials on this and see how viable it's going to be. And of course, the downside of this is you've got to have lots of aeroplanes flying the same route at the same time. So I remember asking the question at the time to Airbus, why would everybody want to leave at the same time? Surely you stagger the flights during the day. And their ethos at the time was airlines would be able to theme these aircraft. So you might have the lead aircraft, might be the business one. So you've got an office, a flying office. Right. And you might have one aircraft that's a flying crash. You've got one which is a casino. So I think that's... But why else would you... you've got to incentivise all these aircraft to depart at the same time if they're going from London to New York, for example. So why would you do that? And that was their suggestion. So I don't know what Delta's plan is for this, but it's interesting.
I think that happens naturally. I think that tends to happen naturally because there's obviously some slots are more popular than others, and you're going there. You see sort of takeoffs from Heathrow or whatever, and there's a lot of there that are going for the same slot. There's key slots there that are the prize slots, and people going to the same place. But the question is, who's going to be the first aircraft that gets the most drag and everybody else behind? I think there's going to have to be some kind of mechanism there that gets shared around there, and people sort of take turns in being the one that burns the most fuel.
Because it is interesting in scenarios like that, just how the industry tries to take inspiration from nature, even though there's still practicalities to be worked out in terms of how it would.
You've got to look at Airbus's Wing of Tomorrow. Taking inspiration from the Albatross, I think, isn't it? So, lots to learn from nature.
Right, and we've got a space story from you, haven't we?
We have, in January, the Blue Origin spacecraft, New Glenn, made its first flights into space. A distinctive looking craft, which had a very good blog on our website. This is the first one to actually be fully successful on its first launch.
And that's reusable as well. I mean, they didn't stick the landing. But it's now interesting that we've got, so the US now has gone from, you think of the retirement of the shuttle, they've now got, obviously not Falcon Heavy, but they've got Starship on the, getting there. Mm-hmm. They've now got New Glenn. Yeah. And obviously SLS for getting to the moon. So going from, no space capability after the retirement of shuttle. Now there's all this other stuff that is coming online. Interesting. So So we're on to, and now we're going to go over to our specialist group insight segment of the podcast. We'll be back in a second. See you well.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Specialist Group Insight segment, where we're going to be discussing the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport in the United States, better known to most of us as DCA. It's situated just a few miles from the White House and Capitol Hill, making Reagan National one of the most operationally challenging airports in the United States. It first opened in 1941 and was backed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And over the decades, it's remained one of the most restricted major airports in the United States, if not the world. The airspace around Washington, D.C. is some of the most sensitive anywhere for fairly obvious reasons, I would imagine. And pilots really have to adhere to strict rules and noise restrictions and so on. One of the most notable challenges are the unique and fairly demanding visual approaches. The river visual to runway 19 is quite well known. Of course, the Mount Vernon visual to runway 1, which in many cases involves maneuvering to land on runway 33, which happens fairly late in the approach. So to help us unpack some of this and talk about what it's really like to fly into Washington Reagan, I'm joined by Captain Steve Green, who's a highly experienced airline pilot and a very valuable member of the Flight Operations Specialist Group for the Society. And like myself, he's flown into DC Airport many times. If you don't know Steve, he's a veteran airline pilot with decades of experience flying both domestic and international routes. He soloed at the age of 16, began his flying career flying Convairs and Metroliners in the US, and later flew for TWA, EOS Airlines, and American Airlines, operating aircraft like the 737, the 757, the 767, and the MD-80. But beyond flying, Steve's a respected expert in aircraft accident investigation and in-flight icing, contributing to major safety initiatives, including the TWA 800 investigation in the 90s and the FAA's aircraft icing research program. He's also worked extensively with ALPA on aviation safety and regulatory affairs. Steve retired off the Boeing 737 and has flown into Washington Reagan, as I mentioned, many times. And he has an incredible knowledge of flight operations, airspace management, and airline safety. So he's the perfect guest for today's discussion. Steve, welcome.
Good morning, Seth.
Thanks for taking the time to join me today. And for those listening, Steve's actually on vacation in Dominica, and I'm in Bogota, Colombia. So we have a fairly international recording today. Yes. So I guess we may as well kick things off right away, Steve, and jump right into the visual approaches. The river visual to runway 19 and the Mount Vernon visual to runway 1, with, of course, the sort of circle, I guess, to land 33, are kind of staples of flying into Washington, D.C. I guess we should talk a little bit about how these approaches are designed and why they're even necessary, given all the airport constraints and things like that around the airport.
I think, well, most of it is just a way to enhance traffic flow because the visual approaches allow you to increase the acceptance rate into the airport. So that makes things easier. And obviously taking advantage of the river as a safe area to operate over. So the object is to stay over the center of the river. I got yelled at on the visual to runway 1 years ago because, there's a little jog in the middle there, which I didn't use because I'm looking at the runway and I thought this is fine. But I'm supposed to make that little jog, so I stay over the center of the river. And I think there's also some noise abatement things that probably come into play. There's a number of folks living in proximity who would be constantly living with, jet noise overhead. I think there's an attempt to minimize that too.
You're right. There are, thinking back to my own experience, not only is the lateral component, but there's a vertical component as well for noise, isn't there? There's recommended altitudes that they'd like you to maintain for the noise component. And I learned recently that they have somewhere in the region of about 62 slots per hour into Washington National Airport. So that's slightly more than one landing a minute. So I guess that explains they really need to have that type of tight separation.
Yeah, and as soon as obviously the weather goes down, that acceptance rate is going to be diminished no matter what they do. Yeah. So they're just looking for ways they can optimize this, and that's not unreasonable. And as we've said, the visuals are not hard, but they can be a little intimidating when you start out. There's no doubt. The first few times you do them, it's a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, they are. And they're a little bit challenging as well from a flight ops management perspective. I remember the airline that I was involved in, pilots had to have, actually, if I remember correctly, the River Visual 19 was a captain's only flown approach, first of all. And
that sounds right.
And we had to give the pilots a special checkout to fly in to Reagan and do those approaches.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's an FAA designated special airport, right off the bat. But yeah, there's certainly increased requirements for a checkout there. Even back when I was flying the metros with Air Virginia back in the 80s, we had a special requirement. Every new captain had to have a check airman with him the first time he went there.
Yeah, and they have offset PAPIs, as I recall, as well on runway 19. The 21 degrees offset from the runway to help you make that last turn over the I think it's the Rochambeau Bridge. I think it is. You make one last turn right towards the end there.
Yep, you go from one set of PAPIs to the other, and if you're not ready for that can be kind of disorienting.
That's right, and I remember you had to have a good awareness of the wind and things like that to make that turn successfully.
Yep, and particularly if it's a really windy day,
Yeah. On the runway 1 side, the Mount Vernon visual, it's not uncommon to be asked to take runway 33. I remember doing that many times myself. And at our airline in particular, we had a sort of a policy whereby the aircraft was expected to be in a certain configuration by the last bridge, the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, in order to accept that approach. So if you could be configured at the bridge and then break it off and follow the east shore of the Potomac, then you could accept runway 33 and do that. But if the aircraft wasn't configured appropriately, then you had to turn it down and ask for runway 1 instead.
Yeah, I think the thing that's really challenging about the 3-3 thing is, what's challenging about the whole airport is trying to maintain approach stability.
Yeah,
because you've got all this maneuvering going on. You've got some vertical profiles that they're not really challenging, but they're not quite standard either. So there's all kinds of little increments in there, and you're trying to maintain a stable approach because your landing distance is constrained. Right. And you got 6,000 feet with the big runway, and then you turn around and go over to 3-3, and that's only 5,000 feet.
Yeah.
And 3-3 always gave me a laugh back in the 80s because they had this huge concrete wall at the end. And we used to talk about accelerate stop distances. And at the time, the Metroliner, the early Metros, the Metro 2s were Part 23 airplanes. So they didn't have an accelerate stop distance published. They had what was called accelerate and slow to 35 knots. And so my argument with the FAA was, so I'm going to go off the end of 3-3 at 35 knots, and what happens? I mean, that whole concept is ridiculous. So the point is, it's a very limiting runway, and there's nothing wrong with it. 5,000 feet is a good distance for a lot of airplanes. It's not a big problem, but you've got to be stable, and you've got to be on targets in terms of the vertical profile and that sort of thing. And that's what makes it really potentially challenging. Obviously, the guys that do it all the time, it's pretty routine. I mean, they're not intimidated by it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, the airline that I was with at the time, I think we had 3 flights a day into DCA, and it's just part of normal life. We knew the airport, we knew what it involved to go in there. We'd all been checked out on it, and as far as I recall, it was a fairly well-run tight, smooth operation in and out there. It was demanding for sure. And I think one thing that made it quite demanding was that type of visual flying isn't something we really do a lot of anymore in the industry. We generally seem to be ILS to ILS, ILS to RNAV, straight in approaches and that sort of thing. So this would call upon a skill set that you didn't get to use very often, which has its challenges.
Yeah, and I think, now you could argue that the guys who used to fly the U.S. Air Shuttle in the 727s out of Washington National, and then they'd swing through LaGuardia, and LaGuardia itself has a few approaches that potentially are somewhat challenging. The visual to 2-2 used to be quite the escapade.
The expressway visual, that's right.
Yeah, the expressway visual, and so those guys would sort of look at us and laugh because they made their living all day, every day doing this kind of thing in a 727, So but you're right. It's not something we do all the time. I enjoyed it because of that. It was a lot of fun on a good day. If it was a lousy day, it could be pretty stressful, but we don't do that very often. Everything's straight in, everything's all set up, boom, boom, boom. And
yeah, you're quite right. So all of these things combined make it a fairly demanding little airport. And of course, something that's come to light fairly recently is the threat of helicopter traffic that use the same airspace. And I remember it was quite common to see helicopters in the airspace when you were flying around in the control zones, particularly quite late in the approach there. And I didn't realize until just lately that they actually had published helicopter routes through that area. Do you know much about that?
I don't know a lot about it. I remember seeing them, like you, all the time. And it's interesting in reviewing that. The only helicopter route that crosses an approach path is Route 4 going down the east shore of the river, which would cross the 3-3 approach path. These routes they're not intended to deconflict if you're operating that approach. I think that's a little bit misleading. Yeah. But yeah, they're very organized. And I can remember always seeing helicopters on that side, usually, the Anacostia River area headed up that way. They were always around, some of them relatively large.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's not uncommon.
I agree. They were just sort of part of regular life operating into the airport. Certainly, it's been a few years to me, but certainly in those days, it was kind of part of normal operations to have helicopters in the area. While I was flying regularly down to DCA, they introduced RMP approaches. And I remember the first time I did the RMP approach to runway 19, I did it in VMC just to sort of see what it was like. And it was absolutely incredible. It nailed the middle of the river the whole way down. It made every turn over every bridge exactly as it was meant to. And it rolled us right out on final. It was a thing of absolute beauty, to be honest with you. So that would beg the question, why don't we just do that all the time? But I suppose separation might be the answer.
Well, a separation is probably one answer. I think there's also a variety of equipment and operation specifications with different operators. I don't know who's got what, but you're right. It works rather well, and I don't know. I tended to be a hand flying guy at the end. I tended to get rid of the autopilot usually somewhere, well outside of the final approach fix. And I would typically hand fly that kind of thing. Even if I was using the RNAV, the RNP approach as navigation, I would typically want to hand fly it just because that's the way I was. But when you get down to it, there's really no reason not to auto fly that thing. And the key, like with the visuals, is having your ducks all lined up and being stable. So you've got it working right. You got all the fixes are right. The system is performing properly. You can sit there and monitor it and make sure it does what it's supposed to do. But as soon as anything gets out of the bag, you're going to have a problem getting it back in the bag. And that's where a missed approach comes into play. But I mean, it's just, you really got to have things lined up properly. You can't be unstable. You can't recover from poor planning at national. It just doesn't tolerate it.
I completely agree. Yeah, and we've focused so far on the arrivals, but I remember the departures as well. Off of the end of runway 1 was area P56, and I remember when I used to train pilots to fly in there, I used to describe that area as an 18,000 foot granite mountain. You can't go in there no matter what. Yeah.
I've heard. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure as recently as sometime close to the end of my career, I seem to recall hearing an ATC transmission about a possible violation. Not to me, but somebody else.
Well, we did at the airline. I was in a senior management role at the time, and we had a crew do the Mount Vernon visual to runway 1 and the experienced wind shear. And of course, the procedure was to keep the wings level, keep the aircraft configured, toggle thrust, and climb straight out into your clear wind shear, and then away you go. So the guys, they followed their training. They flew straight out. There was a wind from the west, so they're drifting at the same time, and their clearance was, I think the big one, as I recall it out of DCA, was the 328 radial off of the Washington VOR. You had to pick up the 328, which took you away to the northwest. And that was the clearance they were given, but of course it conflicted with their training on wind shear go arounds.
Right.
And they ended up just grazing the edge of P56. I mean, literally just the very edge of it. And within minutes, our company had received a phone call, and when those guys landed, we had to stand them down and send another crew down to operate the airplane. They weren't allowed to operate out after that, and they'd literally just grazed the edge of P56. So they take it extremely seriously.
Oh yeah.
Are there RNP departures out of DCA now? Maybe they have those now rather than the old 328 degree radial. Is there an RNAV departure out of that?
Yep. It's actually it's pretty easy. I mean, I thought the 328 radial was fairly easy. I mean, I think
it worked well. Yeah.
But again, you just have to realize, and I think where people get in trouble with that is you got to stay configured, because you're going to start banking the airplane, so you don't want to be retracting flaps too early, and that sort of thing. But also the sequence of when you would normally be cleaning up the airplane gets interrupted by having to make this maneuver.
Yeah,
and so you get caught. You start cleaning the airplane up, and then you miss the maneuver, or you do the maneuver and then you realize, oh wait, we still have to finish cleaning the airplane up. So there's a little bit of a imbalance there that can be distracting. But other than that, it really is just pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I quite agree, Steve. And in terms of stabilized approaches and things along those lines, I know that on a conventional ILS, every airline has a different policy, but we're generally looking to be stable down around the sort of 1,000 foot, 500 foot point on an approach. But of course, when you're doing something like a river visual where you have a turn within the last few hundred feet, what criteria do you use to be stable at that point?
And I think that's a really important point, because obviously you want to be on speed, you want to be configured. The maneuvering has to be managed and fairly gentle, but it's got to meet the criteria in order to make the turn. But I think being stable it really is paramount in this airport. And there are some obstacles to that. Obviously, the maneuvering is one, but if you look, for example, at the RNAV approach to 3.3, here you've got this 5,000 foot runway, and they have a 3.1 degree glide path. Well, that's not bad. I mean, but it's a little bit more than 3 degrees. So it kind of begins to establish something that, here you get to the bottom of it and you're trying to kind of slow this descent rate down. And you can get into a situation where either you're going to touch down hard, which you don't want to do, or you're going to end up floating down the runway, which you also don't want to do.
Yeah.
So it's not a big deal, but you just really have to be prepared for the situations that you encounter there. And the way I used to explain it back in the 80s, and I would argue the same thing today, I used to tell the new captains in the Metroliner, DC is really pretty simple. You do exactly what they tell you to do. Yeah. No negotiations, no special requests or any of that stuff. You do exactly what they tell you to do. If you can't do it, say so right away. I mean, don't sit there and hem and haw and wait to see if it's going to work. If you can't do it, you just speak up because they can handle that.
Yeah.
I can't remember what were we doing. I think years ago they had me. Oh, I know what it was. They had me. That's right. I forgot. They had me come around onto an approach to runway 4, was it? Or maybe, no, it was 3-3. I think, yeah, they had me come around to 3-3. And it was at night, and somehow the runway lights weren't on.
Oh.
And I'm looking out there, and there's no runway. And so I went around, and the controller got kind of bent out of shape that I went around. And I said, well, you got to turn the lights on. I can't land without the lights. So I mean, that's rare. But my point is, they're well prepared for almost anything you need in any situation. They're not trying to be acrimonious or combative or anything like that. They're just trying to really jam a lot into a small can. And they do very well at it. But you really have to work with them. You have to be prepared, have your ducks lined up, be ready to handle the airplane, and know what you can and can't do, and speak up early, and it works fine.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up, Steve. Thanks again for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your time in Dominica. And obviously, of course, for everyone else listening, next month, March, the Flight Operations Group is running its conference on single pilot flight deck operations in London. So if you have a chance to buy a ticket and come and join us at the conference, I'll be there. Steve will also be there, and we would love to see you.
And we're back. So that was a fascinating segment there from Seth, and talking about how the complexity really of the airspace, in Washington. Like I said before, very, very busy. You've got to be on your top of your game there, really. But again, really good to have the the flight operations group giving us an insight into how you do flight operations, I suppose.
Yeah, indeed.
Right, we're on to the February issue. So here's the February issue.
Oh, yes.
What issues have we got on it? So I'm going to start off, and it's relevant with the flight operations group because they have a great bit of conference coming up on this in March. And single pilot ops. So we have an article here on one of the key questions of the day is, do we go to single pilot airliners? And public perceptions of that. And there's been a massive kind of, I think, campaign by the pilots unions, I think we can say that, as to, okay, maybe the technology is there, but is this really a wise idea? What happens if you have a pilot who, food poisoning, heart attack, something like that? Or conversely, there's people who are saying, well, why do you need 2 pilots if you are flying from, Gatwick to, Paris, for like just sort of an hour's flight or something like that,
Second pair of eyes is always welcome.
So there you are. So it's a fascinating article. It's going to be the subject of a flight operations group conference in March. So do look at your diaries and do put that in there. What else have we got in this issue?
Really good article on Just Culture from Air Marshal Sean Reynolds. Second article he's written for us on human factors. So Sean was in charge of, he was actually RF Bryce Norton. So this is a story which started in 2014, and it was just around the time that the Voyager was being introduced into service. That's the multi-role tanker transport, the Airbus A330 derivative. And one of the very first flights the aircraft did, it went out to Canada on a training sortie, and they managed to put the wingtip into a hangar.
Ouch.
And you would instantly think this was going to be a meeting. What was it? A meeting with hats on and no tea and biscuits, I think is the phrase, isn't it? In the olden days of military parlance. And Sean talks about how the more they looked into this, it wasn't really the pilot's fault. They were blinded by a low sun. They changed the way they were training from the VC-10 days. Pilot was in a different seat, the instructor pilot was in a different seat. So there were lots of things that meant this was not necessarily the major error that it first appeared to be. And it's that we all know Just Culture, we all know that it's so important in everything we do now. And it was a great working example of how this is fitted into the Air Force.
I think the interesting thing there also is like you say, multiple things that go wrong, and the holes in the Swiss cheese lining up. And again, referring back to events in Washington of here are a number of things where, you're probably going to get back to it. That here are a number of things where, they all lined up on that night.
Absolutely. It wasn't one catastrophic error. It was, as always the case, it's a number of things which add up into the failure.
What about you, Jack? What are your pick for this month?
Well, we've got a very timely article on the revolving topic of a third runway at Heathrow. Now,
Topical,
Now this is something the Labour government has actually given its full support to. We've got a very good article in here talking about the 60 plus years history of trying to build a third runway at Heathrow and various other options, including Couplington, Maplin Sands, and the various attempts to get this runway off the ground. And it also goes into the issues at play, including environmental concerns and how these could be mitigated by measures such as sustainable aviation fuel, and also the engineering challenges involved.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's been approved, but we're not out of the woods yet, there's still a lot of. I think there's still fair to say it's still got quite a bit of opposition. Including from places where you think, well, shouldn't they be fully in favour? Some of the airlines saying the whole system of charges need to be rethought. So that's kind of sort of interesting as well. So we'll monitor this and see what happens. It's a big boost, and it's actually something that the Labour Party was kind of in opposition to. And they've also got the London Mayor who's against the plan, which is kind of interesting.
I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years. We'll find out exactly what's going to happen with this.
So the other thing we got in the magazine is we had an interview, a roundtable with Emma CEO.
Guillaume Fury.
Yes. So he was here at the Society. He had an exclusive little bit of a media huddle. We were there, and his priorities for 2025, which is obviously sorting out supply chain issues, ramping up. So they're still ramping up, and the airliners that they're selling. But also defence. Defence is now more and more on his radar. And obviously on defence is also a big topic on the other side of the Atlantic as well. And in the February issue, we've got an article by Bill Sweetman looking at tech bros in the Pentagon, or the efforts of Elon Musk and pals to kind of reform defence procurement. Obviously people who may be following this sort of stuff may be aware of Musk's comment on F-35 and sort of controversy around that. And it's really looking at stuff like that on collaborative combat aircraft, drones. Are drones the future? But also, can you cut the waste? Can you get things into service faster, cheaper, better? So Bill, as usual, does a great job there of looking in there at what's going on in US defence policy. And usually, and here's the thing, usually what happens in US defence procurement also kind of tend to have implications for what happens in the UK and Europe as well. So again, one to watch. It's a really topical issue, this issue. Lots of interesting articles in there. So we've also got Afterburner, haven't we, Jack?
We have, yes. So there's
What's in that?
There's lots in Afterburners. So we've had the Vermont lecture on air law here at REAS HQ. The report from the Weybridge branch on their R.K. Pearson lecture, and the usual reviews, book reviews, event listing, and New Society numbers.
Yeah, we also have the updated SDR paper there, which you can go out and download. It's on there on a QR code. Some of them are learned output. Again, if you're one of our local branches, or you're one of the divisions spread across the world, do send us your news, branch reports, lecture reports, events. Send it to Jack here, jack.richardson@aerosociety.com, and we'll try and put it in the magazine. So upcoming events, shout-outs. What have we got coming up? Well, we've got AEROSPACE Lakes Quiz Night is back, 27th of March.
Do I need to start writing some questions?
Be there or be square. Fabulous prizes to be won, and the honour of being the AvGeek of AvGeeks. So that's going to be a great night out, 27th of March. Don't miss it. We've got the light aviation teach-in happening on 18th of February from the GA, the Light Aircraft Design Group. That's how to design a light aircraft. That's a web-based course there. We've got the Mary Jackson Name Lecture, 2020. That's online on 20th of February with Dr. Gaiti Hussain from ESA. So that sounds a really good lecture as well. Contrail Management Workshop, 10th and 11th of March. That's happening here with us and IATA as well. So that's interesting. That's kind of pushing the debate, or pushing the kind of sort of the solutions or the debate about contrail management a little bit further. Obviously, IATA are getting involved. That means the airlines are involved as well. So a bit of progress there. That's something also to watch. Single Pilot Ops Conference. We've already talked about this before. 19th to 20th of March. That looks like it's going to be a really interesting conference, and I'm looking forward to sort of see what's going to happen there. Airshow season is coming up, so we're all getting excited about that a little bit. Obviously, Paris in the summer, but we've also got the DACs are back, or ADAC.
Yeah. So last year we had the DACs over Normandy. A number of C-47 Dakotas flew in from the US. One didn't make it, had an engine failure en route. It's a very unusual aeroplane. It's an R4D, so it's the Navy version of the Dakota, called Ready for Duty, the nose art, owned by the Commemorative Air Force. Not to be outdone, they're coming over on their own this year. They've got a tour of Europe. Named so far, they're doing 3 shows at Shuttleworth Collection. They've also booked for Midland Airfest. I'm sure there'll be others that add on to that as well. But Midland Airfest, big friend of ours, they're also giving us tickets as prizes for our quiz. Number of things highlighted for this year so far. It's early days with announcements, but they're marking the 50th anniversary of the B-17 Sally B being in the UK. Very first display Sally B did May the 18th, 1975.
Wow.
Ask me how I know that. Same day I was born. So we're both 50 on May the 18th. But MAF have also got, and it's something I've never seen before, a privately owned Huey Cobra. So coming over from the Red Bull collection in Austria.
Wow.
And again, we've said on the pod before, Midland Airfest, set in the grounds of a stately home in Ragley Hall near Worcester, Redditch area. Imagine seeing a Huey Cobra going around the grounds of a British stately home. Is there anything more bizarre and spectacular? Other announcements so far, Old Warden Shuttleworth Collection, a number of things confirmed, but my highlight, a Tiger Moth. But not just any Tiger Moth. This is the DH-71, this is the monoplane. So not the Tiger Moth.
Monoplane, Tiger Moth.
Not the Tiger Moth you're familiar with.
Blasphemy.
This was a racer built in the 1930s, monoplane racer, really sleek-looking thing. They built 2, none survived. This is a replica which is just flown, owned by Steve Jones, famous Red Bull Air Race pilot. Ultimately, hopefully going to be based at Shuttleworth, but it's going to make its debut at the May show at Old Warden. And that, for me, so far, that and the Huey Cobra highlights of the year. So, and we also got a new event at Lanston, so nice to see a new air show coming on the calendar as well. So we've started the point in the season now where things are ramping up, so we'll give you the rest of the announcements next month.
Brilliant. Okay. Finally, before we head off, what have we been watching, reading, playing? Who wants to kick off?
I'll start. Well, I've listened to Invasion, which is a novel by the BBC security correspondent Frank Gardner. It's essentially an espionage thriller about trying to stop a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, which is again a very topical subject at the moment. But yeah, there has some interesting aviation elements, such as the moving of aircraft carrier groups in the region and the testing of hypersonic missiles.
Wow. Okay.
I've got a prop.
You've got a prop, okay. It's show and tell. For those of you who are listening to this, there is a big book being held up, and it's a lovely book.
It is a lovely book. It's the Art of the Airport Tower, which is by Carolyn Russo, published by Smithsonian. And it's effectively a photograph book of airport control towers around the world, but done in an absolutely beautiful black and white style. It really is spectacular. And just the sort of thing that doesn't matter whether you're interested in aviation or not, it's a nice thing to have on the coffee table. So That was a belated Christmas present, and it is a very highly prized exhibit of mine now.
It's surprising how artistic it is, isn't it? I mean, I had to just quick flick through it, and it seems that those if you're an architect and someone says, "Can you do a control tower?" That's your license to
You're
go.
free reign, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, right, okay. It used to be so high, but apart from that, go nuts on it and do what you like.
It's amazing the designs that have come through. I had a quick look through, and it really is all shapes and sizes.
And interesting, of all the control towers around the world, through the Middle East, through the US, or everywhere, it's Edinburgh on the front cover. So, and if anyone's been to Edinburgh, it really is one of the most spectacular towers. That's the one that they featured on the cover, which is that.
Brilliant. Okay, and I've been doing some flight simming again, and I've been recreating World War II mosquito missions in IL-2 Great Battles. There was a mosquito campaign that came out, and really good because it's got a voice navigator this time. So you're in the aircraft and you're flying, especially at night as well. Really immersive stuff of having the navigator saying, enemy coast ahead, turn whatever. And then you're going over also like night intruder ops and searchlights coming up at you as well. Really, really immersive stuff, and your navigator giving you a direction. So
you know what we should do with that? We should get Colin Bell to fly that.
We should, shouldn't we? Yeah.
103, still going strong, ex-Mosquito.
And he was awarded. He got in the King's Orders.
Was it CBE? I think. British Empire Medal. That's right. Yeah. So yeah. In fact, Colin's flying out to the US in a couple of weeks. He's going out to Palm Springs Air Museum for their gala dinner, and they've flown a Mosquito down from the former Paul Allen collection to be at Palm Springs. Flew down recently down to California to be there. For Colin to reunite himself with the Mozzie.
Brilliant. Okay.
Fantastic.
On that note, we're going to call it. We're going to draw stumps here. So where can people keep up with the RS and the mag? Well, it's aerosociety.com. We've got the Aero Society Insight. You've got YouTube. You've got your SoundCloud. Everywhere that. Where can we find you?
On X at RAES Jack R.
And Steve?
I'm on X on RAES Steve B, or more commonly found on LinkedIn and Facebook as Stephen with a PH, Stephen Bridgewater. I'm
still on X, but I'm also on the Blue Sky now. But on X, you can find me RAS Tim R, and Blue Sky is the same thing. It's more or less the same thing. So with that, we're going to draw it to a close now. We welcome your views, questions, feedback, comments. Send them our way if you like it. And reminder, we're on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. So yeah, bye for now.
See you next month.
See you next month.